You're not going to believe what happened on this flight. What started as a tense confrontation between a liberal airline pilot and a passenger over another man sitting in first class turned into something no one saw coming. Let's break down the entire story. It all began on a routine domestic flight from Dallas to New York. Nothing out of the ordinary. Passengers boarded, stowed their carry-ons, took their seats. You know the drill. Among them was a man named David Leavitt, a well-known liberal commentator and frequent social media presence. Seated in first class looking out the window was Congressman Eli Crockett, a recently elected conservative firebrand from Texas. Now, to those familiar with either man, this had the makings of tension before the plane even took off. Leavitt reportedly boarded later than usual, trailing behind a few other passengers. When he reached his seat, also in first class, he spotted Crockett across the aisle. Eyewitnesses say his expression changed instantly. Leavitt paused, glanced around the cabin, then walked over and said something directly to Crockett. No one heard what was said at first, but the mood instantly turned chilly. A few passengers later recounted that Leavitt looked visibly agitated. One woman seated behind the two said he muttered something like, "I thought they didn't let insurrectionists in first class." Whether he meant it as a joke or not, it definitely didn't land that way. Crockett, calm and composed, reportedly, just looked up and said, "I was elected to represent people just like you were free to book this flight." Tension hung in the air. Then, out of nowhere, the pilot came walking up the aisle. Yes, the pilot, not a flight attendant. He was still in full uniform, and people initially assumed something was wrong with the plane. But he didn't head for the cockpit. He walked straight to the first-class cabin, and he had a purpose. Apparently, word had reached the cockpit that a situation was brewing in the front of the plane. A flight attendant, overhearing the exchange, had informed the captain before takeoff. That's when the pilot decided to come out and take matters into his own hands. He approached Leavitt and asked if there was an issue. Leavitt, not backing down, said something like, "I'm just surprised we're seating people who actively work against democracy in first class." Gasps. Audible discomfort. Everyone could feel this wasn't just a disagreement. It was political, it was personal, and it was escalating. But here's where the story takes a turn. The pilot took a deep breath, looked around the cabin, and asked both men, Leavitt and Crockett, to follow him to the galley area near the front of the plane. Reluctantly, both got up and followed. Now here's the twist. 15 minutes later, both men returned. Calm, composed, no sign of the earlier tension. Even more shocking, Leavitt apologized publicly to the cabin. He turned around, stood in the aisle and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I let personal opinions get ahead of basic decency. That's on me. We're all entitled to our views, but not at the expense of others' peace. I'm sorry." Stunned silence. What happened in the galley? What did the pilot say? Well, a flight attendant who overheard the conversation later told a reporter that the pilot had shared a personal story. Turns out the pilot's own family had been torn apart by political divisions. His brother stopped speaking to him after the 2020 election. His father missed his wedding because of a political disagreement. The pilot told them, "I've seen what this kind of division does. You're both passionate men. That's fine. But this is a plane full of people trying to get somewhere in peace." Apparently that hit home. Crockett was reportedly the first to nod in agreement. Leavitt paused, then said, "You're right. I can disagree with a man without dehumanizing him." And that, believe it or not, was the moment it all changed. By the time the plane landed in New York, the two men had actually exchanged contact information. A reporter caught them later that week grabbing coffee near Times Square. Did they become friends? Who knows? But what we do know is this. On a day when a plane was supposed to simply carry people across the country, it also carried a lesson, one about humility, decency, and what happens when we choose dialogue over division. Not every day does a confrontation in first class end with an apology and the beginning of mutual respect. And to think, it all started with a seat assignment. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next unexpected twist in everyday headlines. See you in the next video. So you'd think that was the end of it, right? Two men with opposing ideologies find common ground after a tense confrontation. But no, this story didn't stop at the airport. A few days after the flight, Eli Crockett posted a surprising tweet. It was a photo, not a staged handshake or a press-friendly snapshot, but a casual picture of two coffee cups on a table with the caption, "You never know who you'll end up talking to when you put the yelling aside." Civil conversation, social media outrage. Thanks, David. People were floored. The replies came flooding in. Some praised the maturity, others mocked it. Some accused Crockett of going soft, others accused Leavitt of betraying the resistance. But it didn't matter. Something had shifted, and both men seemed to be leaning into it. Later that week, David Leavitt went live on a podcast, an interview with a left-leaning channel known for tough takes on conservatives. When asked about the encounter, Leavitt didn't flinch. He said, "I've spent years throwing verbal grenades online. But here's the truth. It's a lot easier to vilify someone behind a screen than it is to look them in the eye and hear their story. Eli and I still disagree on almost everything. But he listened. So did I. That matters." That clip went viral. People started asking, was this just a publicity stunt? Or was something real happening here? Meanwhile, Congressman Crockett gave an interview on a local radio station in Texas. When the host joked about converting a liberal mid-flight, Crockett laughed and said, "David and I didn't change each other's views. That's not the point. The point is we found out we're both human. And honestly, that's a big enough win in today's climate." Suddenly, both men, previously locked into their ideological bubbles, were showing up in spaces their audiences weren't used to seeing them. Crockett appeared on a progressive panel discussing bipartisan cooperation. Leavitt wrote an op-ed titled, "What a Conservative Taught Me About Listening." And remember the pilot? A few days after the story hit the news cycle, that same pilot, whose name turned out to be Captain Jace Holloway, was invited onto a morning news show. Normally, pilots stay out of the spotlight, but Holloway agreed, saying he wanted to model leadership, not just fly planes. He recounted the story with calm humility, ending with a message that stopped the studio cold. People think leadership is about barking orders or taking control, but real leadership? It's knowing when to ask two grown men to have a conversation when no one else thinks it's possible. That clip was replayed on multiple networks. Airlines even started using it in internal training programs to teach emotional intelligence in high-stress situations. Then came the biggest surprise of all. A month after the flight, Leavitt and Crockett announced they would co-host a one-time public event, a town hall called "The Seat Next to Me, a Conversation Across the Aisle." The idea was simple: no media tricks, no audience plants, just two people talking across political lines. Live, unscripted, unmoderated. And guess what? It sold out in under 3 hours. The event was held at a neutral venue in Philadelphia, intentionally chosen for its historical symbolism. As they took the stage, there was tension, yes, disagreement, absolutely. But it was respectful, candid, even funny at times. By the end of the night, audience members were giving standing ovations, not because anyone had won, but because both had chosen to show up, not to debate but to listen. What started as a clash in first class ended up becoming something rare, a spark of hope in a time when we're taught to cancel, block, and shout over each other. Maybe it was just a one-off. Maybe not. But the lesson lingered. Because if a liberal pundit and a conservative congressman can go from confrontation to coffee in the span of a 2-hour flight, what's stopping the rest of us? Sometimes, the most important seat on the plane isn't the one by the window. It's the one next to someone you're willing to understand.